Good morning, everyone. Good to see you, and thank you for joining this excellent panel at the start of our Growth Summit. We are very conscious about the importance of growth this year, because it is really very important situation we are in when it comes to reviving inclusive and sustainable global growth. Our economists, and we also have seen the economists in IMF and the World Bank also predicting 2.8, 3% global growth this year. That's a lot lower than we have been used to in the last decades. In fact, we have to go all the way back to 1990 to see growth numbers at this level. So the economic backdrop that we are faced with is challenging, but compared to the geopolitical backdrop that we're faced with, maybe even a bit less challenging. The geopolitical backdrop is also causing us concerns and is also influencing the economic situation. What we really need to avoid is that this is a lost decade when it comes to growth. We need to revive growth, but that also has to be done in a very smart way, because we have inflationary pressure that we haven't seen in a long time, so that has to be dealt with. But we also know that this is affecting developing countries and emerging economies quite seriously. We know that capital is now flowing to the large economies, and how do we face and what kind of policies do we apply, both in developed and developing world? What are the structural changes? What kind of supply side economics could we apply? And how can we use trade as a tool in reviving growth? I would say that there will be no revival and a real of the economy, global economy, and a recovery without the trade and investment recovery. We have an all-star panel to deal with these topics. Let me then introduce them, and we'll come back to them, of course, with questions. First, on my right-hand side, we have Minister Bandar Akorayev, Minister of Industry and Mineral Resources from Saudi Arabia, G20 economy. We have then Minister from Bangladesh, Tipu Munshi, Minister of Commerce from Bangladesh. Welcome. We then have Rasia Khan, Head of Research, Chief Economist for Africa and Middle East, Standard Chartered Bank. Then we have Chandri Banerjee, Director General of the Confederation of Indian Industry, and we have one of the successful industrialists, strong voice from the business sector, Budur Ukayai, President and CEO of Kala Holding. Welcome. Let's give them an applause, huh? Even with that kind of grim outlook that I was sharing, we should then try in the panel to change maybe the zeitgeist a little bit. And coming to you, Minister, we know that Saudi Arabia is a fast-growing economy. We know that Saudi Arabia is the most populous of the GCC country and a real important player in also the whole MENA region, and maybe increasingly so. When I was in Saudi Arabia recently, and we met, and I also met with the Crown Prince, he strongly underlined that the future of Saudi Arabia is really about how one can create growth and investments. We would love to hear, of course, your answers to how to revive growth, but also we know that the Middle East, the MENA region, is the least integrated of all the global regions when it comes to trade. And now with the new situation in GCC, that it's again cooperating much better. What are the prospects for increased integration? Over to you, Minister, and welcome to Geneva.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me for this important session. I think it's needless to say that growth is a key component of, every country's development. I mean, coming from private sector, it was for us clear in the private sector that the concentration of manufacturing, for example, of trade is not sustainable. And one of the things that you just mentioned, I mean, the fact that our region is one of the least of integration is a result of how the overall trade, I would say, setup that has been developed as a result of GATT and then later on the World Trade Organization. And therefore, we are seeing these challenges that are today with global trade. And definitely what have happened as a result of COVID and disruption is just another demonstration of how fragile the global community is when it comes to global trade. Now we see also political tension and the war in Ukraine and so on. So definitely it's important to ensure that the global community have the right policies, the right direction, to be able to build long-term investments that are integrated with different industries on one hand, but also geographical location on the other hand. If we look at our growth in Saudi Arabia that has been fueled by our oil resources has been very impressive. But what we are doing in our Vision 2030 is really looking at how we can make this growth impressive growth is actually selectively targeting different sectors that are going to be key in a global environment, unlocking value, adding value to our natural resources, our also geographical location. So Saudi Arabia, since the launch of the vision, have made it clear that it is going to be a country that is connected with the global community when it comes to trade, when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to resources, oil and gas, mineral resources, and logistical, a very important logistical hub. We have seen that we have shown that the growth we have made, although definitely very impressive in terms of numbers, but the quality of the growth went to the right sectors, making sure that we connect. Now back to the question, what we are doing today, in at least I would definitely talk about the agenda I'm responsible for. When we started looking at mining as a sector to be unlocked in Saudi Arabia, we made sure that we unlock the sector, but at the same time make sure that it is linked with an added value vision. That's why we had the Ministry of Industry connected with mining. The way we are planning our mining resources, the mining law is also incentivizing investors to go downstream. Definitely these investments will not only satisfy our local demand, but they are there to satisfy the region and the global community that is in very serious need towards the future of minerals. We have created the platform, what we call Future Mineral Forum, which today attracts more than 60 countries trying to work together to see how this industry can be integrated, how different countries can play different roles to ensure the efficiency of supply and sustainable growth in that sector. Regionally, and more regionally probably in the Gulf, for the first time in almost 17 years, we revamped the common industrial investment law that is going to integrate the different regions, the different countries in the Gulf. Also, we have a unified, overarching industrial strategy that is also bringing all GCC countries to see how they can cooperate with each other, how can they complement each other. It can be in manufacturing, it can be in logistics, it can be in human capital, it can be in natural resources. This is a very serious discussion we are having, for example, from our part. And then we have the larger region that we see Africa, Middle East, and Central Asia being an important player for the future of minerals. And again, that's also part of the Future Mineral Forum. This region has more than 35% of global reserves. Unfortunately, it's very fragmented. It's untapped. There's a lot of political issues. There's a lot of need for restructuring in different countries to allow this investment to take place. So, as a conclusion, I think our vision is all about economic diversity. It's all about really positioning Saudi Arabia to be an important player in the global trade, global resources of energy, minerals, and so on.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. I was also privileged to have your presentation of your mineral strategy. When I was there, we also see that Saudi Arabia is now taking much clearer steps in saying that if you want to do business in Saudi Arabia, you also have to have your regional headquarters here, and you have also the launch of Riyadh Air. So there's a lot of things happening. I was thinking, Razia Khan, since you're also the chief economist of the Standard Chartered Bank for this region, for Africa and the Middle East, based on the fragmentation, the challenges that I touched on in the introduction, that we need to revive growth. How is your outlook economically for Africa and the Middle East?
Well, there's no doubting that there is, at this point in time, a fairly divergent outlook. The Middle East, especially the oil-producing countries of the GCC, have been able to reap the rewards of higher oil prices. They have recovered very well since the shocks of 2015. However, the real story for many Middle Eastern economies is really around the diversification effort. What we've seen since that late 2014-2015 oil price shock is an accelerated embrace of diversification, of reform, that will hopefully allow the region to be that much more resilient through future hydrocarbon price volatility. And we see this in terms of labour force inclusion, female participation in the labour force. We see it in terms of the effort to build intra-regional infrastructure. That remains an important theme everywhere, as well as making banking systems that much more resilient to the oil cycles that we had seen in the past. Now, for Africa, we know that we are seeing a very different outlook at this point in time. The tightening of global liquidity, the capital flight for many emerging and frontier markets, a great deal of challenge. It's not clear where the financing for a lot of the closer regional integration is going to be coming from. At the same time, there is great political will to make the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement much more of a reality. It seems ambitious at first sight. We all know that of any developing region, Africa had the least amount of intra-regional trade, very little trade complementarity, and the infrastructure that did exist really was there to serve the export of commodities mostly from Africa to the rest of the world. So the question we all need to be asking ourselves is how, in a world where financing is going to be that much more difficult to come by, where there are big concerns about the more vulnerable economies and the external debt positions of those economies, where everyone is thinking, how do you mobilize long-term financing for infrastructure? How do you build on the trade gains that can really help prosperity in this region? Many of you in this room will know that there's been a lot written about Africa's own vulnerability to global fragmentation of trade. Africa was the big beneficiary of the rise of China post-2001, the demand for its commodities. Now there's concern that if we are seeing a fragmentation of global trade, regions like Africa, trading a lot with the EU, still one of the largest trading partners for the region, receiving a lot of FDI from the EU and other Western economies, but seeing a lot of trade with China, how are they going to be put at risk? If I were to summarize very quickly, I'd say the outlook for the Middle East is ultimately encouraging because of the embrace of reform. But for Africa too, the political willingness to realize those trade gains promised by the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's early days, there's a lot of work to be done, many challenges still, but the political will to realize this could be a significant driver of growth.
Question, follow-up. How worried are you about some of these, especially African countries, defaulting because of the high debt ratio? And we see that capital is now moving to some of the more developed economies because of the high interest rates. We know that there are countries now really, really vulnerable. They don't have a lot of liquidity. We know that Pakistan has been under pressure. We know that also other African countries. So how worried are you about this? And how to also agree on a deal related to, for example, a haircut? Would we, in this fragmented world, see, for example, China and the US agreeing on a deal to support one of, for example, African countries?
So that's an excellent question. And at this point in time, markets are thinking at some point we're going to get the Fed easing. They're pricing in quite a lot of easing still to come. Does that lend itself to more accommodative global financing conditions? Should we assume that the capital flows come back to emerging markets, that the interest will be there? Probably not for the time being, which means for much of the region, locked out of international capital markets, the focus really needs to be on the mitigants that can be put in place. A lot of discussion from the international financial institutions of accelerating the amount of concessional financing, in some instances grants to countries that have very low debt carrying capacity, but also this great need where countries do run into trouble with liquidity issues primarily. It starts off as a liquidity crisis, not a solvency crisis. Is there a way to prevent that from tipping over into a solvency crisis? And if there's no alternative to countries other than to seek a debt restructuring, the question we're still grappling with, is it possible to do this faster? Is it possible to reach more of a global consensus to get debt restructurings done in a much faster way, greater predictability, a restoration of growth even sooner? We all know that everyone would benefit if this were the ultimate outcome. The difficulty, of course, is in getting there. And in a more globally fragmented world where other geopolitical considerations run the risk of taking over, that could be an issue.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Let's then move to Bangladesh and Minister of Commerce. Looking at the last growth numbers, I looked them up last night. Bangladesh is still doing pretty well. I think we're expecting more than 6% growth this year, at least more than 5%, and I think 6% for 2024. Bangladesh has a huge export market in Europe and in the US. That's your most important export market. And most of your import, the biggest country when it comes to importing for Bangladesh is China. And then you have also a big neighbor to your west, being India. So how are you maneuvering in an area where India meets China, and you also have the complex geo-economic and geopolitical landscape that you're faced with?
Thank you, gentlemen, inviting me here. You see, we have now last 15 years, the growth in Bangladesh is tremendous. We almost more than 6%, is around 7% growth it was every year. But last 2 years, I mean, the COVID and other problem, it is slowed down. But now we expect in this year also, as you mentioned, that today, that 6% our expectation, and I think we can achieve that. You know, our 84% of our export is ready-made garments. And the destination of the ready-made garments to USA and mostly European countries.
Thank you.
No doubt. So, and as you mentioned that the supplies, mostly 60% of our supply chain comes from China. That's true also. Last the 2 years we suffered a lot for that supply was really disturbed. So now we have a different plan. We shall have to plan in different ways. So you see, this our regional things. India is our neighbor, no doubt. But we have 7 sisters in Indian side, which is around Bangladesh. And West Bengal is another state of India. So that's also quite big. So we are planning to reorganize all these things, bringing them into in the growth, the business basket also, with developing the relationship and all these things. And we are trying to diversify we have the RMG sector, but we want to improve our other sectors also, what we are doing now. Especially, you see, if you say the ICT sector is trying to achieve that, target, what we are now planning to go. And also, you know, that the geopolitical scenario, a lot of investments also coming to Bangladesh. There are those who are changing their place, from China to relocating these things. So we are trying to catch that thing also. So Bangladesh is ready for that thing. And we have suffered the supply thing, so we are thinking this substitute of that, how to face that thing also. And if you see the export, now some other items are also coming up quite in a good way. So I believe that China's supply, we are rethinking how to, we shall have to, on fine morning we cannot change all these things. But we shall have to find some other way that not to depend on, that's true also, that depending on China, we have suffered a lot. So, and we said that the local economy is doing good. We are inviting the foreign direct investment. More than 100 economic zone is there declared, and a lot of investments are coming. So hopefully all these things, if really happens, dependency on others will be less, and our export basket will be more. So far, I believe. Thank you.
No, thank you, and it's impressive, the economic results. I've been several times in Bangladesh myself and have seen the difference in 20 years. It's incredible, and also thank you for underlining the importance of diversification. Then going to India, your big neighbor in the West, the most populous country in the world, 1.4 billion people. Also the fastest growing of the large economies of the world. So many are talking about India's year, India's decade, on top of Asia's century. And this year, Mr. Banerjee, you also have the G20. And we know that CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry that you're heading, is playing a major role also in the preparations for the G20. But I'm wondering, how do you see the role of Indian business in Indian economic and structural changes moving forward to continue the growth, and also the Indian industry and business role globally, because I think you also have ambitious outlook outside India.
Right. Thanks, Borge. And yes, it's indeed exciting times in India, and we are, as you rightly said, in the presidency of G20, and as an institution, we are actually now spearheading the B20 part of it, and therefore I find your question relevant from that prism. And we are looking at when we really look at the next 25 years in India, and we achieve 100 years of our independence in 2047, we are looking at a 40 trillion economy by then, at least from our side, and where business, of course, both industry, manufacturing, and services have a huge role to play. And through that, one of the things that we have been able to really achieve in India over the last few years have been a very coordinated consultation approach between the public and the business. And it is not just in a federal country and democracy like India. It's not only the federal government, but also the state governments, which India in many ways are like 35 mini Indias. Therefore, there are so you see, the way we have worked, we have moved to the second phases of reforms. We've seen reforms which are really like, say, digitization is one example that if you take, it's touched millions of people. You talked about 1.4 billion people. Actually, it has touched the people in the last village of India. So, and that's where we see the opportunities of demand, the opportunities of growth, the opportunities of even sharing with the world, and that gives me a segue to talk about the B20 process, and which is contributing to the G20, where we are taking businesses together to move, when we're talking about global value chains, and to see how we develop even regional networks within the systems. We're working if you really look at, in 8 of India's 10 largest trading partners are from the region. And trade will be one of the biggest engines for growth. And we are really we are seeing the type of foreign direct investments that are coming into India, which is also led by a lot by business. And Indian businesses today, even mid-sized companies who are being able to even set up or acquire in US or in India. So Indian investments even abroad becoming very strong, which is really contributing to these global chains that I talked about. Second, I think business has a huge role, and we're working with our neighbors, with our other regional networks. We have been collaborating very strongly from the business side on areas like I2U2 or the Indo-Pacific in a very, very strong way, and we are seeing huge results coming out of it. You see the way we are getting into FTAs with UAE has been a phenomenal sort of an outcome that we have had. Or with Australia, the UAE one was signed in 89 days. The Australia was signed fast, and we are really looking at other free trade agreements. And with even if you really look at the eastern part of our side, the east, when we talked about our Look East policy, we have trade agreements both in regions or with countries in a very strong way. So the other point where we see business leading a very strong role, and because you mentioned 1.4 billion, is all about people. So regional network when we talk about regional trade, when we talk about global trade, I think we need to also look at the future of jobs. And you've come out with a fantastic report on future of jobs. And when you look at future of jobs, we see how we can really make any growth to be sort of job-oriented growth, and there comes the role of business in terms of looking at the future of jobs which are emerging, that future and how we can sort of upskill our people, look at those skillings which are required, which will give jobs to them in our country, and even people how we can have cross-border mobility, how we can have mutual recognition of our qualifications. Even our new education policy, if you see, are allowing foreign universities a much easier segue into India to come and develop, and therefore even get into and recognizing vocational training to be a part of the syllabus in secondary schools. So I think the role of business is pretty defined when we really look at how it can contribute to India becoming a sort of a developed country, if I can say, and even move up, as I talked about, a target of 35 to 40 trillion. I see a growth rate in India not less than 6% definitely in the coming year. We have been 7%. We will end up with 7% plus in this financial year. And I see a potential of India actually growing at a much greater space, with more of it's becoming easier to do business with India. We are seeing stronger infrastructure development, and there also business plays a lot of role. All of this leading to much and contributing to the world. And I think what we will be able to do is to see how we can share our own successes. I talked about the digital stack story of India, which can actually, one of our legacy issues that we are really trying to work with, and I was so happy that my colleague panelists spoke about Africa, because one of the things that we are really looking through the B20 prism is to how we can get the world attention and world economically integrate with Africa. So I think business has a major role to play, and with our policymakers and with regional collaboration, we can take that forward.
Well, thank you very much, CB. I visited last fall, and you hosted a dinner in New Delhi, and that was when there was a low point here in Europe when it came to optimism or lack of optimism. So I said it was like very good for me to arrive in Delhi, and was at that dinner it was only optimism. So it was good to feel optimism again. But things are looking also a little bit better in this part of the world. We were supposed to freeze in the winter. We were supposed to see inflation getting all out of control, and also see major reallocation of industries. We are having these challenges still, but not the freezing one though, but we are dealing with it. And that's, I think, a good segue into Badr Okiai, President and CEO of Kale Holding. Kale Holding, Kale Industries, I think you represent your 17 different companies. You have production in Turkey, but also in several other countries. You're a big industry conglomerate, and you're still doing well, but how have you maneuvered through all these crises? Ukraine crisis, the energy crisis, challenges with the lira. What has you been, how do you see the outlook now? Also, if you look at trade, and how are you maneuvering?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Binda. And I think that this summit discussing is very timely about growth and looking forward from here to the world, how it can be revamped. So this is in a time of uncertainty, as discussed in the previous panel. So it's a very visionary for the forum to put out such issues. I think there are some realities that we need to focus moving forward. Especially, we need to discuss more among governments and businesses, as India achieved, and we should engage more in these discussions in order to establish a system of thought on how the global system and globalization should be rewired for a better inclusivity for all nations and regions. So, as well as boosting regional trade and cooperation in existing fragmented world. This is not easy, as said before. There are limitations, there are regulations, obviously increase in security and uncertainty. And all this happens, as said before in the previous channel, that in a less conceptual way, but we are living through when we we are surfing on the global economy. So these things are not easy. And also it's very difficult to understand, as discussed before. There are powerful political dynamics resulting in driving force for also populist, let's say, movements and policies in different countries. So all this context makes very difficult for businesses to make decisions. I think if we think after COVID and living in an area, as you mentioned, close to war since 3-4 years, we as businesses in the region, we were deeply affected. So we had to overcome every regulation, every global challenge, and also all the macro developments that are happening worldwide, which are happening among major powers and resulting in a shift in the value chain. So for us, it's really overwhelming situation. But I think we think about regional cooperation. We must have concrete plans and policies to maximize advantages in global change. So as businesses, we like to look more into integration to the global system. We want to increase competitiveness while, with the return in exports. And also we want to create higher value add by using opportunities of opportunity window in technology advancement, etc., in front of us. But this is not easy in a fragmented and uncertain business environment. So I believe in our part of the world, we were really directly impacted. So we are working in two different areas. One is the building materials, and the other one is the aerospace business. So one is very well regulated, the other one is much B2C. So we have been directly impacted by geopolitical drift and tensions, mainly in our aerospace businesses, and also for the COVID travel and bans and restrictions. We had to face many problems. For example, some part of the world, we were lucky to work during the COVID bans, so we had the opportunity to increase our exports. But due to the trade and insecurity and problems within the economies, for example, we are facing right now, together with India, is anti-dumping tax from EU. So during the, for example, war, we are affected a lot because in the building materials, we had the materials coming from Ukraine, especially a precious clay that we are buying everywhere from the world, from Spain, Italy, they are buying there. So it was a problem in the supply chain. So we had to find new ways of producing the same quality, mainly relying on our R&D and human resources, possibilities that we had at our hand. So this is another issue. Of course, pressures on climate crisis and adaptation for the businesses is another problem. As Mrs. Razia said, the financial institutions and all the financial outlook is not favorable for businesses so far. So, but we have, for the business continuity, we have to invest. So to do that in a difficult financial economic system is really difficult for us. We were one of the biggest supplier of F-35 programs in Turkey. So we entered the program in 2005, and since 15 years we were a part of that, and we were producing 700 parts for the airplane, and on the first airplane there were our parts. So we are a very well-known manufacturer vis-a-vis the defense and aerospace industry, but of course with good ties with our suppliers, but this shift in the powers and the insecurity so affected us, of course, coupled with the decision taken by our government also, so we were kicked out of the program. So we had to find new ways of integrating ourselves in the different programs. Obviously, civil engineering aviation was one of them, but during COVID that got a hit. So we had to find other projects, other, let's say, ways of working in the industry. Of course, these G2G programs are very difficult to handle, especially in this context of the world that we are living in, but we need to continuously adapt ourselves as businesses. Obviously, in the region, when we talk about regional cooperation, of course, we want to increase as Turkey regional cooperation, and we believe that we have a good industrial base and we can help countries in the region. But of course, previously we had some also regional problems among different countries. Now things are a little bit better and lifted. So hopefully we can do more working, with these countries. And this is challenging for businesses. So we'll see what will be in the next next decade. So how we can adapt. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and it's very impressive how your company has dealt with all the challenges and also have prospered. We are in a situation that we have 2 minutes left, and I was hoping to take questions, and I was also hoping to come back to the panelists. I would say if each panelist can answer 2 of my questions in 1 minute each, we'll have a chance to close with the panelists. I think the opening plenary starts at 11, but then we have to do 1 minute. So I was thinking, based on this discussion and the global outlook, what keeps you up at night, and what is the biggest hope for the year to come? So let me then start with Razia Khan. It's always good to go to an economist. What keeps you up at night, and what is the most hopeful thing when you look at the coming year?
The growth outlook is probably the thing that keeps me up most at night. We know that it's been a tough time, the inflation shocks in developed markets especially, the persistence of inflation, but the hope is that with enough resolve to try to explore other drivers of growth, and this is precisely the intra-regionalization that is so important, that has really gone largely untapped, that could be the big opportunity. This is how we keep global growth going.
Good. Excellent. Excellent content, and 1 minute. Huh? CB, can you match that?
No, I can't match that. But yes, the worry is we talked about trade, and I'm very keen that the efforts that we had put into an open multilateral sort of trading order, I think that should not be shaken, and we should see to it. And that sometimes gives me a fright as to when we talk about regional cooperation, are we moving away from multilateral, which we should not, and we should have a strong multilateral. What gives me hope is because we have many good stories, and you heard some great stories from the panel today. So it's just not going to, the world economic order, I think we are seeing emerging areas of growth in Asia. We have many, many good stories. So I think that gives hope that we are seeing a very strong, if I can say, emergence of economic sort of stability in many parts of the globe through regional collaborations and cooperation.
Mr. Munshi?
Yeah, thank you very much. Our country now, we have the power of working force and the policy of the government. Our Honorable Prime Minister brought our country up to this level. So now we are thinking how to expand, how to diversify our production, how to get new product also. So all we are working in that aspect. And beside that, you see, we have now new markets also. Now our country is now in such a position, the new investments are coming. So I hope that this future is good, and we want to expand that market, regional and global market. So hopefully everything will look in the next years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Madam Ukiai?
Yeah. My conclusion would be we need to focus on not only the potential but also limitations regional trade and cooperation can achieve if the context of cooperation is not set right. So companies, therefore, from our own experience, should rely first on their capabilities and resilience built vis-a-vis on unfavorable conditions occurring internally and internationally, but also look forward to create possibilities to be more integrated into the global system. So opening up new geographies, as discussed in the morning, like Africa and new countries, so are very important. And we as business, we have to try to be more part of the global system and to be a more resilient and good business partner for a new cooperation in the region.
Well, thank you very much. So the famous last words, Minister, goes to you. Anything keeps you up at night, and what keeps you optimistic?
Very little things keep me up at night, but I think what's for us most important is really how to continue the successful growth that we have been able to achieve since the launch of our Vision 2030. I mean, moving from a GDP of 640 billion to 1.1 trillion, making success in all of the different parameters of efficiency in doing business, ranking from 48 to 24 in complexity and diversity, in the LPI, how we have moved. So I think that the race today, the challenge today in the country is how to continue the continuous growth. Luckily, the foundation that has been built in the last 6 years is really the fuel that is taking us for the future. We have seen many of the targets that we were aspiring to achieve by 2030 have already, some of them is showing great progress in difficult areas, especially on the social side. Education and training and skilling and human capital development is key, but also in areas where we need a lot of prerequisites like regulation, infrastructure, and so on. So export growth has been tremendous in the last few years, from $200 billion to more than 440, and so on. So making sure that the pace is strong enough. Luckily, the global also outlook of energy is definitely going to help the country accelerate and move faster, bringing the resources from the natural resources to a more solid and sustainable growth. And finally, I think one of the things that we are always focusing on is how to ensure that our human capital development is on the right track, is also being advanced in a manner that allows our future generation to be well ready for future jobs. And finally, the RDI structure, which is research, innovation, and is also in place to ensure that as we progress in growing our sectors, taking technologies from abroad, but also being ready for doing our own technology and growth.
Thank you very much. Listening to the panel's summing up here, my conclusion is that this panel really sleeps well. Because they're very optimistic. I heard more about the positive prospects and opportunities than the challenges, and thank you for that. I think we need it also at the start of this summit that is about growth and jobs. I think even in a world order I would say we're between world orders. We don't know what's around the corner. It's always a bit of instability when there is no clarity, but there's also opportunities if you are willing to make sure that you do structural changes, that you also look at the supply side, and also, as mentioned, we still have big opportunities, but also challenges when it comes to skills and skills gap. As you saw in our report, 473 million people are in a skills gap. Even if some countries do have lack of labor, it's almost 500 million people that are not employed due to this skills gap. So a big applause to a great panel. And you're all cordially invited to the opening that's happening on the other building. Just walk out there, and then it's in the Eiger, and it starts at 11. Thank you.